When I turned 18, everything changed for the worse. My parents and my twin brother, Jake, decided there wasn't enough space for me at home. That was their excuse to force me out. For years, I struggled to survive. I moved from place to place, never knowing where I'd sleep next. At one point, I even had to live in a tent. I did whatever it took to keep going, but despite all of that, I worked hard and finally built a stable life. At 26, I owned my own home. Then, out of nowhere, my family showed up at my door, led by Jake, who is now expecting his fourth child with his wife. They want to move in with me, the same brother who once pushed to have me kicked out because there wasn't enough space in our childhood home. Growing up, it was clear that Jake was the favorite. My parents adored him, while I was treated like an afterthought. They even admitted that they wouldn't have had me if Jake hadn't been born. He got all the best things, new toys, nice clothes, while I barely had the basics. Because of this, Jake became selfish and entitled. Instead of being a supportive brother, he always put me down. The only person who ever truly cared about me was my grandfather. He saw how unfairly I was treated, but when he passed away when I was 15, I lost the only person who was on my side. When Jake got his girlfriend pregnant as a teenager, our parents married them off and let them live in our already crowded house. That meant I didn't even have a couch to sleep on anymore. Sometimes, my dad slept in the living room, so that wasn't an option either. They made it clear I wasn't welcome and told me not to ask relatives for help because they didn't want anyone to know how they treated me. I had nowhere to go. For a while, I was homeless. At one point, the police found me and mistakenly brought me back home. By the time I dropped out of school, I had already given up on that path. Instead, I focused on working, relying only on my own income to survive. After a while, I realized I needed better skills to improve my future. My dad was a repairman, and as a kid, I used to play with his tools instead of toys, helping him fix things around the house. That early experience proved useful later when I decided to invest in my education. Eventually, I landed a job at a car manufacturer. I worked hard, moved up the ranks, and became a design manager. Not long ago, an old friend was going through a divorce and needed to sell his house fast. At first, I wasn't sure about buying it, but the huge discount and flexible payment plan were too good to ignore. So, I went for it. 3 weeks ago, I moved into my new 4-bedroom house. Then, out of nowhere, my family showed up at my door. I hadn't spoken to them in years, and I lived 17 miles away, so I had no idea how they found me. My guess? A neighbor who still followed me on social media probably told them. When they arrived, my parents acted like they were proud of me, but it felt strange. They were still renting, yet suddenly, they were impressed that I owned a house at 36. Meanwhile, my brother, Jake, and his wife, Lisa, walked around as if they were inspecting the place for themselves. When I questioned them, they vaguely said they were just checking on me. It was almost funny how they suddenly cared about my life, now that I had something they wanted. During the visit, Lisa boldly claimed one of the bedrooms, excited that it had a private bathroom, acting as if moving in was already decided. My parents half-heartedly told her to calm down and manage her kids better, but I could tell they were on her side. I was stunned. I immediately shut down any idea of them moving in. Things escalated fast. They started pressuring me, saying I had a family duty to let my brother and his family live with me. I refused, reminding them that Jake's kids were his responsibility, not mine. I made it clear that I wouldn't feel guilty for their poor planning or lack of space. As they left, I felt relieved, knowing I was finally free from their expectations. I couldn't help but remember how, when I was younger, my grandfather let my cousin sleep on the couch, but when I needed help, he kicked me out instead. No one in my family ever cared about me struggling, whether I was living with rats in my boss's garage or stuck in a tiny apartment for 10 years. They never checked on me. When I brought this up, my mother started crying and tried to hug me, but I stopped her. I told them to leave. Jake's wife, Lisa, cursed at me for speaking harshly to her husband, but I stood firm. If they didn't leave, things would get worse. And I made sure they left before they could argue. My anger was clear. I'd put up with their toxic, selfish behavior for far too long, and now their greed was showing. I wasn't the obedient teenager they used to control. If they pushed me any further, I was prepared to call the police. Just to be clear, my sister, Lisa, never offered to pay rent. She and her husband, John, had been living off my parents for over a decade, and now they wanted to do the same with me. My parents never encouraged her to become independent. Instead, they expected me to take on the responsibility. A week after the first confrontation, my mom came back, but this time, she was more direct. She argued that my house had enough room for Lisa and her family, even though it was clear things were crowded at my parents' place. I stayed firm in my refusal. When that didn't work, she started making veiled threats, saying that my mostly empty house could be a safety risk and that having family around would help with chores. I wasn't fooled by her manipulative tactics and told her to leave and not come back. A few days later, a neighbor called me about suspicious activity near my house. He said he saw a pregnant woman, a man, and a young boy peering through my windows and hanging around my backyard. I was grateful for his watchfulness and gave him my contact information, asking him to keep an eye out. I had planned to install security cameras, but hadn't gotten around to it. 5 days later, the neighbor called again, saying he thought someone had broken into my house. When I rushed home, I found out he was right. Lisa and John had climbed through a rear window. When I confronted them, Lisa tried to justify their actions, saying they had no choice and blaming me for being unreasonable. As I processed how bold she was being, John made a smug comment about how easy it had been. I lost my temper and confronted him physically. Lisa tried to get in the way, and in the chaos, their teenage son hit me over the head with a bottle, leaving me bleeding. Things got out of control quickly, and Lisa called our parents, saying I was the aggressor. When the police arrived, they started sorting things out while Lisa and John frantically apologized, begging the officers not to arrest their son. Despite their pleas, I was ready to press charges, but Lisa denied everything, claiming it was just a family visit gone wrong, and that her son's actions were a prank. When my parents arrived, they immediately sided with Lisa, pressuring me to drop the charges. They tried to defend her and made me out to be the villain. I realized then that they were trying to gaslight me into giving up, but I refused to let them twist the truth about what had happened in my own home. Thankfully, my neighbor came forward with a crucial statement, which led to the arrest of everyone involved. They spent the night in jail since my parents couldn't afford their bail. The next morning, while they were facing trial, I was at the hospital getting treated for my injuries. I took a few days off to recover and press charges for assault. The court granted me compensation for my legal fees. Despite my parents' attempts to convince me to drop the charges, I stood my ground. I even threatened legal action against them for their role in helping plan the attack. Since my nephew was a minor, he was handled under juvenile law and spent a short time in a juvenile facility. His parents were held responsible for restitution, lost wages, and my medical expenses. Lisa and John were fined heavily. They later asked the court to let them complete part of their fine through community service. Since then, things have been quiet. I hope they've learned their lesson and stay away, but my parents haven't given up. Just yesterday, they showed up at my door and waited outside for an hour until I let them in. They begged for my help, but when I realized they were speaking on behalf of Lisa, I immediately refused to get involved. Then they revealed the real reason for their visit. They were getting older, their house was falling apart, and they wanted to move in with me. They expected me to take them in out of duty. I confronted them about their failure as parents. They mentioned giving their house to Lisa, which seemed like another tactic to pressure me. They even suggested that Lisa could pay rent to live in my house, and I could use it to help with my mortgage. I refused, telling them that Lisa needed to handle her own finances without me. They kept pleading, saying my house was too big for just me, but I made it clear that my future plans didn't involve staying single or taking care of them out of obligation. Their emotional manipulation didn't work. I reminded them of how they had treated me in the past and made it clear that I wouldn't be guilted into giving in. It was obvious they were trying to use family ties for their benefit, but I stayed firm in setting boundaries to protect my well-being. When they left, visibly upset, I shut the door behind them. No matter what they said about me, I refused to let them take advantage of me. Now, I'm ready to move on to the next chapter of my life, stronger and wiser from everything I've been through. Sometimes, standing up for yourself is the hardest thing to do, but it's also the most powerful. To anyone out there dealing with a difficult family situation, remember this: you deserve to be treated with respect. Never let anyone make you feel less than you are. If you liked this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more. I'd love to hear your thoughts or any similar experiences. Share them below. Until next time, take care and stay strong.